Dadperfectrevenge. The night I found out I wasn't invited to my own daughter's rehearsal dinner, I was standing in my kitchen in Cleveland, Ohio, folding the check I'd just written for $45,000. The final payment for Brenda's dream wedding. I'd already covered everything she'd circled in those glossy bridal magazines she'd been collecting since she was 12. My late wife Dorothy would have loved to see this day. I was doing it for both of us. Let me back up. My name is Frank Mitchell, but everyone calls me Hank. I'm 58, retired from 35 years supervising at the Ford plant. Dorothy passed 3 years ago from cancer, and since then, I've been trying to be both parents to our daughter Brenda. I called Brenda to confirm the Riverside Gardens payment went through. "Hey, sweetheart," I said when she picked up. "Just letting you know the final wedding payment cleared. You're all set for Saturday." There was a pause, music in the background, laughter, the clink of glasses. "Oh, Dad, thanks." Her voice sounded distant, distracted. "So, what time do you want me there Friday?" I asked. "For the rehearsal dinner? I was thinking I could come early, help set up if you need anything." Another pause, longer this time. Then a different voice cut in. Kevin, my soon-to-be son-in-law. Smooth and practiced like he'd rehearsed this. "Hey, Hank. Actually, the rehearsal dinner is just for the wedding party and immediate family. You know, keeping it intimate, small, and meaningful." I switched the phone to my other ear. Immediate family. I'm her father, Kevin. "I am immediate family," I said slowly. Right, he said, his tone shifting to that patient voice people use when they think you're not understanding something obvious. "But it's really just the people in the ceremony. Brenda's bridesmaids, my groomsmen, our parents who are walking us down the aisle. You get it? Our parents who are walking us down the aisle. But I was walking her down the aisle. I was the one giving her away. I'm walking Brenda down the aisle," I said, my voice quiet. "Actually," Kevin said, and I could hear Brenda whispering something in the background. "We decided my dad and her mom's sister, Aunt Grace, will do it together. You know, since Dorothy isn't here, it feels more balanced that way." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Aunt Grace, Dorothy's sister who lived in Seattle and saw Brenda maybe twice a year. She was walking my daughter down the aisle, not me. "Brenda," I said, my throat tight. "Is that true?" She came back on the line, her voice small. "Dad, it's just Kevin's family is really traditional, and they thought it would be nice if—" I didn't hear the rest. The phone felt heavy in my hand. The kitchen, the one Dorothy and I had remodeled together 20 years ago, suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too full of ghosts. The oak cabinets we'd installed ourselves looked down at me like silent witnesses to this betrayal. The breakfast nook, where we'd shared coffee every morning for decades, now felt like a museum of a life that no longer made sense. "Dad," Brenda said, "are you still there?" "Yeah," I managed. "I'm here. You understand, right? It's not personal. It's just, this is our day, and we want it to be perfect. Our day. The day I'd been saving for since she was born. The day I'd liquidated part of my pension to pay for. The day I'd sold Dorothy's vintage Buick to cover the last-minute upgrades Brenda insisted on. "Sure," I said. "I understand. Great. So, we'll see you Saturday at the ceremony. 2 o'clock sharp. Love you, Dad." The line went dead before I could answer. I stood in my kitchen holding a silent phone. Outside, the streetlights flickered on over the driveway where I used to teach Brenda to ride her bike, where Dorothy and I had waved goodbye on her first day of kindergarten, where I'd helped her load up for college 12 years ago, promising I'd always be there for her. Always. The backyard stretched out beyond the kitchen window, still showing patches of Dorothy's flower garden that I couldn't bring myself to dig up. The old swing set I'd built when Brenda was 6 stood rusted but solid in the corner by the fence. Everything in this house was a reminder of the family we used to be, before cancer took Dorothy, before Kevin poisoned my daughter against me. I looked at the checkbook still open on the counter. $45,000. That number stared back at me like an accusation. It wasn't the biggest check I'd written for Brenda, not even close. There was the $15,000 for the down payment on her condo when she and Kevin first moved in together. The $8,500 I'd quietly transferred when their credit cards maxed out during the holidays. The $12,000 for Kevin's business venture that never quite got off the ground. I'd kept telling myself it was what fathers do. You help, you support, you make sure your child has opportunities you didn't have. but this being replaced by Aunt Grace, being excluded from the rehearsal dinner like I was some distant cousin who might embarrass them. This was different. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Dorothy's old reading chair, the one with the faded blue fabric that still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, and stared at our wedding photo on the mantel. We'd gotten married at St. Mary's with 50 people and $500 between us. No fancy venue, no band, no riverside gardens, just love and a promise that we'd kept for 32 years until cancer took her away. The morning after that phone call, I woke up early and did something Dorothy used to do every month. I got out my old calculator from the plant and spread my bank statements across the kitchen table. When you're living on a factory pension and Social Security, you have to watch every penny. The monthly checks total about $3,200, and after the mortgage, utilities, and medical insurance, there isn't much wiggle room. As I looked at the numbers, really looked at them, I saw something I'd been too guilty to admit before. In the 3 years since Brenda met Kevin, I'd given them $75,000. I wrote it down on a piece of paper and stared at it. $75,000 was more than I'd earned in 2 full years at the plant. It was nearly twice what Dorothy and I had saved for 8 years to put the down payment on this house back in 1995. And for what? So my daughter could exclude me from her rehearsal dinner? So some punk kid who'd never worked a real day in his life could tell me I wasn't immediate family? I picked up my phone. There were 3 text messages from Brenda, all sent after midnight. Dad, you're not mad, right? Kevin's family is just really particular about these things. Love you. Can't wait for you to see me walk down the aisle. By the way, we might need a little help with the honeymoon. Nothing major. We can talk after the wedding. Walked down the aisle with Aunt Grace and Kevin's father, while I sat in a pew like any other guest. And now they wanted more money for the honeymoon. That's when I knew something inside me had broken. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but quietly, finally. Like an old machine that's been running too long and finally gives out. I opened my laptop, the same Dell I'd bought when I retired, and logged into my bank account. The joint checking account I'd set up years ago. The one that was supposed to be for emergencies. The one Brenda had access to for when she really needed help. The balance was $3,200. It should have been closer to $18,000. I clicked on the transaction history, my hands shaking slightly. $1,200 withdrawal. Emergency car repair. $2,400 withdrawal. Medical bill. $3,800 withdrawal. Surprise tax payment. $4,200 withdrawal. Kevin's business emergency. $3,400 withdrawal. Urgent dental work. All within the last 2 months. All while I was writing checks for wedding costs. I printed out the statements and spread them across the table next to my calculator. The math was simple and brutal. In 8 weeks, they'd pulled out $14,800 from our emergency account. Emergency car repair, when Kevin had just bought a new Camaro. Medical bill, when they both had insurance through her job at the department store. Urgent dental work that somehow required $3,400. I closed my eyes and let the truth wash over me. She wasn't just taking my money. She was taking it while actively excluding me from her life, while letting her boyfriend's family call the shots about who was immediate family and who wasn't. Now, I'm not a stupid man. 35 years on a factory floor teaches you to think ahead, to plan, to document everything, because management will screw you if you don't have proof. So, I did something I'd never done before. I started my phone recording app and called Brenda back. "Hey, Dad," she answered on the second ring. In the background, I could hear Kevin's voice and what sounded like his mother. "Brenda, I've been thinking about what Kevin said yesterday, about the rehearsal dinner. Dad, we already talked about this." Her voice had an edge to it now, impatient. "I know, but I'm your father. I've paid for this entire wedding. Don't you think that earns me a seat at the rehearsal dinner? Dad, stop. You're being controlling. Kevin's family warned me this might happen. They said you'd try to manipulate me with money." I felt my blood run cold, but I kept the recorder going. "Manipulate you? Brenda, I've given you over $75,000 in 3 years. So what? You have plenty. You're retired. What do you need money for anyway? You just sit around the house all day." The words hit like a slap. Sit around the house all day. Like the 35 years I'd spent getting up at 5 a.m., working 10-hour shifts, saving every penny so she could have opportunities I never had, meant nothing. I need it to live, Brenda. I'm 58, not dead, and I certainly don't need my own daughter stealing from my emergency account. Silence. Then Kevin's voice in the background. Did he just call you a thief? Look, Dad, Brenda said, and her voice was ice cold now. If you can't handle not being the center of attention, maybe you shouldn't come to the wedding either. I stopped the recording. I had what I needed. My hands were steady as I hung up the phone. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I was going to do. That afternoon, I drove across town to a law office I'd found in the Yellow Pages. Susan Baker, attorney at law. The office was in a converted house on Lorraine Avenue. Nothing fancy, but the reviews online said she specialized in elder law and didn't charge Fortune 500 prices. Susan Baker turned out to be a woman, about my age, maybe a little younger, with gray streaks in her brown hair and the kind of direct gaze that told me she'd seen plenty of family drama in her time. Mr. Mitchell, she said after I explained the situation. What you're describing is textbook financial elder abuse. The fact that you recorded that conversation was smart thinking. Elder abuse? I'm only 58. You're over 55, you're a widower, and you have an adult child making financial demands under threat of exclusion. That's elder abuse by Ohio standards. She leaned forward across her desk, which was covered with legal files and coffee-stained papers. Tell me everything, Mr. Mitchell. Start from the beginning. So I did. The wedding costs, the years of support, the joint accounts, the rehearsal dinner, the exclusion, the recording, all of it. I pulled out the folder I'd brought with me, thick with bank statements and printed emails. When I finished, she smiled for the first time. Mr. Mitchell, do you have documentation for all of this? I nodded and opened the folder. Everything. I keep detailed records. Had to at the plant. Management would try to screw us on overtime if we didn't have proof. Bank statements, canceled checks, all of it going back 3 years. Good, she said, flipping through my papers. Because we're not just going to defend against whatever they throw at us. We're going to take action first. Over the next few days, Susan and I built my case like we were assembling a transmission. Every piece had to fit perfectly. Every bank statement going back 3 years. Every text message where Brenda asked for money. Every withdrawal from the joint account. The paper trail was devastating. $15,000 condo down payment. $8,500 credit card bailout. $12,000 failed business investment. $45,000 wedding costs. Dozens of smaller amounts. $1,200 here. $2,400 there. $3,800 for a surprise tax bill that probably didn't exist. We organized it all in a thick binder with tabs and highlights, like a shop manual for family exploitation. If they want to play hardball, Susan said, tapping the binder, we show them exactly what kind of people they are. But I hoped it wouldn't come to that. Part of me still believed Brenda would come to her senses, that she'd call me up, crying and apologizing, asking me to walk her down the aisle like we'd always planned. That hope died the following Tuesday. I was out front weeding Dorothy's flower bed when a car pulled up to the curb, Brenda's silver Honda. She got out, sunglasses on, despite the overcast Cleveland sky, and walked toward me like she owned the sidewalk. We need to talk, she said. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, the same knees that had knelt beside this flower bed, teaching her to plant marigolds when she was 8 years old. I have a lawyer now, Brenda. You should talk to her. I'm not here about money, she said, crossing her arms. I'm here about the wedding. My chest tightened. What about it? She took off her sunglasses and I saw her eyes were red, but I couldn't tell if it was from crying or anger. Kevin and I have been talking, and we've decided maybe it's better if you don't come. The world tilted. Don't come to your wedding? The wedding I'd paid $45,000 for. It's going to be awkward now with everything that's happening. You closing the accounts, hiring a lawyer, making this whole thing about money. We don't want that energy on our special day. Making it about money, I stared at my daughter, really looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize the person standing in my front yard. When had she become someone who could say those words with a straight face? Brenda, you texted me asking for honeymoon money the same night you excluded me from the rehearsal dinner. Because we thought we could count on you, she snapped. We thought you loved us enough to help us start our life together. I've given you $75,000. And we're grateful, she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. But that doesn't mean you get to control our lives. This is our wedding, our day, our decision. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I paid for it. So what? You think that buys you the right to judge us? To embarrass us by making a scene? I haven't made any scenes, Brenda. I just stopped saying yes to every demand. She stepped closer, and for a moment she looked just like her mother when Dorothy was really angry about something. You know what? Fine. Keep your money, keep your petty little boundaries, but don't expect to be part of our lives anymore. Each word hit like a hammer blow. Brenda? Kevin's family warned me about this. They said you'd try to manipulate me, use money to control me. I didn't believe them, but I was wrong. I stared at my daughter, this stranger wearing Brenda's face, and felt 30 years of love and sacrifice crumble to dust. I have never tried to control you. Then why are you doing this? Why are you ruining the happiest time of my life? Because I'm your father, not your piggy bank. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Uncertainty maybe, or recognition. But it vanished as quickly as it came. Don't come to the wedding, she said again. I'll have your name removed from the guest list. She turned and walked back to her car. I stood in my front yard, dirt under my fingernails from Dorothy's flower bed, watching my daughter drive away. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting long shadows across the lawn Dorothy and I had, planted together 30 years ago, and I realized something that should have broken my heart, but somehow didn't. I'd already lost her. Maybe a long time ago. Maybe the moment Kevin convinced her that love could be measured in dollar signs and that fathers who said no were manipulative and controlling. That night, I called Susan Baker. She uninvited me from the wedding, I said. There was a pause. I'm sorry, Frank. Don't be. I think it clarifies things. How so? Now I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Susan's voice hardened. Then let's give them the fight they asked for. 2 weeks later, my neighbor Carl Peterson knocked on my door holding a manila envelope. Some guy in a suit left this, Frank. Said to make sure you got it personally. I knew what it was before I opened it. Complaint for breach of contract. Plaintiffs Brenda Mitchell Taylor and Kevin Taylor, defendant Frank Mitchell. They were suing me for $32,000 for the honeymoon I'd promised but failed to deliver, plus emotional distress for willfully and maliciously withdrawing promised support and causing severe mental anguish during the most important time of their lives. I called Susan immediately. They beat us to it. Good, she said. Now they've shown their hand. We file our counterclaim tomorrow for elder financial abuse, harassment, and reimbursement of all funds given under duress. Can we do that? Oh, yes, and we're asking for your legal fees too. 3 weeks later, we stood in Cuyahoga County Family Court, Judge Patricia Wells presiding. She was a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense expression that told me she'd heard every sob story in the book. Brenda and Kevin sat with their lawyer on one side. Young guy, maybe 30, expensive suit, the kind of slick smile that reminded me of the corporate lawyers who used to come to the plant trying to break our union contracts. Their lawyer went first. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of promissory estoppel. Mr. Mitchell made repeated specific promises to fund his daughter's honeymoon and continued living expenses. The couple relied on these promises in good faith and are now left in financial distress. Then Brenda testified. She wore a pale pink dress and spoke in a soft voice about how I'd always been her rock after Mom died, how I'd promised to take care of her forever, how I'd abandoned her right before her wedding. I don't understand what happened to my father, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. It's like he became a different person, all because Kevin's family wanted a traditional, intimate rehearsal dinner. Kevin testified too, painting himself as the devoted fiancé just trying to honor his family's wishes. He talked about his failed business like it was a tragic misunderstanding, rather than a scam that burned through $12,000 of my money. Then it was our turn. Susan stood, calm and precise as a surgeon. Your Honor, the plaintiffs would have this court believe that Mr. Mitchell is a callous father who abandoned his daughter. Nothing could be further from the truth. She opened our binder, the one we'd assembled like evidence in a criminal case. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Mitchell has given the plaintiff $75,000, not lent. Given, with no expectation of repayment and no written agreement of any kind. She walked Judge Wells through the documentation. Every check, every transfer, every time I'd said yes, when any reasonable person would have said no. This is not a man who fails to support his daughter, Your Honor. This is a man who was systematically exploited until he finally found the courage to say enough. Then she played the recording of my conversation with Brenda. The judge listened without expression as my daughter's voice filled the courtroom. "You have plenty. You're retired. What do you need money for anyway? You just sit around the house all day." When the recording ended, you could have heard a pin drop. Then I testified. I told the judge about the rehearsal dinner, about being replaced by Aunt Grace, about the joint account withdrawals I never authorized, about working 35 years to build a nest egg that was being drained by my own daughter. "Your Honor," I said, looking directly at the judge, "I would have given my daughter anything. I did give her everything. But the moment I stopped, she sued me. That's not love. That's exploitation." Judge Wells removed her glasses and looked at both sides. "Let me make sure I understand. Your clients received $45,000 for a wedding, $15,000 for housing, and multiple other payments totaling $75,000. And now they're suing for an additional $32,000? Your Honor, the promises were made." "Alleged promises," the judge interrupted. "Verbal statements of support are not legally binding contracts, especially when the alleged promisee has already provided substantial assistance, far exceeding any reasonable expectation." She looked at Brenda and Kevin. "I see this pattern frequently in my courtroom. Adult children who have become accustomed to parental support and view it as an entitlement rather than a gift." The gavel came down like thunder. This court categorically denies the plaintiff's claim. Furthermore, I'm ordering the plaintiffs to pay Mr. Mitchell's legal fees, and I'm referring this matter to Adult Protective Services for review as potential elder abuse. Brenda's face went white. Kevin started to stand, but their lawyer grabbed his arm. In the hallway afterward, Susan shook my hand. "You did it, Frank." Through the courtroom doors, I could see Brenda crying while Kevin paced back and forth, his face red with anger. Their lawyer was packing his briefcase like he couldn't get out of there fast enough. Walking out of that courthouse into the Cleveland afternoon felt like stepping into a new life. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, and for the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Over the following months, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I sold the big house and moved to a smaller place near the lakefront. I joined a woodworking group at the senior center, started making furniture like I used to before marriage, and kids took up all my time. I even took a trip to Mackinac Island, something Dorothy and I had always talked about but never done. 3 months after the court hearing, I found a letter in my mailbox. Simple white envelope, familiar handwriting. "Dad, Kevin left me last month. Turns out he was only interested in me as long as the money kept flowing. I'm writing because I need you to know that I understand what I did to you. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trying to get back into your life. I just want you to know that I see it now, what I lost. I'm sorry, Dad. I read it twice, then put it in my desk drawer. Maybe someday I'd write back, maybe I wouldn't. But for now, I was at peace with the silence. My name is Frank Mitchell. I'm 58 years old, and for the first time in years, my life belongs to me. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we've helped the most, because they've learned to see our kindness as weakness instead of strength. Real love isn't about never saying no. It's about caring enough to set boundaries that protect both people from becoming their worst selves.